In a recently launched teaser campaign that you might have seen, we now know that Powers, which is a beer that we all associate with the late 1980s through to the early 90s, just associated with that particular era. Nothing says that era in Queensland like Powers Bitter. But in a recently launched teaser campaign, you might have seen the ads. The brewer has announced that Powers is back. Powers Bitter was first brewed at their Yatala Brewery back in September 1988. Now, Powers was subsequently sold to Carlton United Breweries in 1993, but at the height of its powers, pardon the pun, the beer had 10% of the Australian beer market. It was a hit, but the relaunch has just been announced by Carlton United Breweries, which is now owned by Asahi, a behemoth of beer brewing around the world. If anyone can make it work, it would be Asahi. But they're going with a new logo. They're sort of turning their back on history. A few interesting questions that have been raised by this move. Melissa Morgan is MBA Director. She's an Associate Professor with the School of Business at Uni SQ, and she joins me now. Melissa Morgan, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
This would be, I would imagine, for students of marketing and business, this would be an interesting scenario. Is it a no-brainer that they would bring back a brew like Powers, or does it seem a little bit like it could go either way?
Oh, look, I think it's probably a very well calculated move, and probably capitalises on a few things. So, as you said, it's great memories of that time, very much an iconic Queensland brand during that period. So, I think you get that whole power of nostalgia. There's a couple of generations of, beer drinkers that would actually look really favourably upon that. And I guess the other thing too is you've now got the people who were drinking Powers back in the 80s are an older working class group now who are sort of bombarded with all of these new craft brews and craft brands. So it's probably got some really excellent cut through, even just the name. And Bernie Powers was a real personality that I think they, sort of wanted to see him succeed as well. So I think it's probably a good strategy.
It's a really interesting point. I must admit, my first thought was, back in the 80s, and I think that was the reason, I think that was the reason that Bernie Powers has said that, Powers as a brew came into existence, because it was a very limited market of beers in Australia at the time, certainly in Queensland, and it needed to be shaken up a bit. So he came up with this brew that was sort of new, and because it was new, obviously attracted a huge following. But so my first thought was that, but now the beer landscape's completely different. We've got so many different brands and craft beers and beers from overseas and new beers that are coming on by the mass producers as well. But that's actually probably going to be a benefit because, as you say, it's the oldies who just want to get back to something they know again.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's got the cut through of the it's a known entity. It's something that people associate as being a Queensland brand as well. And that was Carlton's strategy in the 90s, was to get rid of all the locally brewed brands. But we've seen that bringing back Great Northern. The Cairns Brewery was closed in the early 90s, and it's come back and done exceedingly well. And I think Powers originally did sort of make that great mistake that they tried to go quite quickly outside of Queensland into the Northern Territory and Northern New South Wales, and it didn't work as well. A lot of that was supply chain issues, but, it is a Queensland brand, and I think that we see that bringing back this regionality is really working, and I do think it's probably got a lot to do with the fact that, the more complex a brand category gets, the more people rely on, their sort of habitual, behaviours and going back to what they know.
What about the logo, though? I mean, if we're cashing in on that nostalgic idea and people saying, almost, there's one that I know I like that, it'll sort the wheat from the chaff. Wouldn't they, they're going with a brand new logo. Does that seem like a wise move? I mean, non-marketing experts like me would have thought that the old logo would be one of the biggest selling points.
Yeah, look, I think Powers is one of those that it's really the name. I think at the time, as we said, it was about Bernie Powers giving people a choice, going up against the big guys. So I'm not so sure that the actual logo was as powerful as just the name.
Right.
And, I think that teaser they've got out there at the moment, Powers is back, it's about bloody time. That's a real sort of, I guess, again, associated with that nostalgic feel that it has about, being a localised brand that took on the big guys. So I think in this case, probably the period of time that's gone by, it'll be the name that's the strength rather than necessarily the logo.
Even though Asahi has, the might and the money behind it, and the size of the company behind it, that they could probably go hard and relaunch Powers all around the country and perhaps even to other countries. Do you think that they will aim to just sort of keep it to Queensland, or will they try to make it very much an Australia-wide beer, and even internationally?
Yeah, look, I don't know that it would have an international appeal.
No.
I think at this stage, I think this is really a getting back to the regions kind of launch. I mean, they've had actually really good success across Queensland with Great Northern, and you see that they're using the might of their distribution channel there. But no, I think the Powers is probably a play to get back local market share, wrestle it back maybe from some of the more minority brands. But I think it's probably just a very smart play to capitalise on branding that was invested on decades ago that they can now leverage on.
Melissa, you've given really, sound reasons. Obviously, this is your field. Really sound reasons why it will work. But tell me, is with the right marketing campaign and enough money behind it, could any brand or product of yesteryear be relaunched, or is that a bit of a minefield? Like, I don't know, give me an example of something that's vanished from the marketplace, either a brand or a product that probably could never be resurrected. It's a question without notice, but...
No, look, I think actually it depends on what the base and the following and the loyalty was like at the time. We know there've actually been other beer brands have come back. Carlton have brought back other beer brands that have actually been, demanded by the public because they wanted to see it. I think we are going through a bit of a nostalgia trend at the moment. I think the lolly category is one where we see all sorts of lollies, being integrated into other things like, biscuits and ice cream and all sorts of stuff. And I really think people are so saturated with their lives at the moment, and they're exposed to so much information. This information age is really overwhelming. So I think sometimes going back to those brands that we grew up with is actually something that people find quite familiar. And I think we even see it in the movie industry with certain franchises, coming back to characters that people resonate with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, well, Top Gun, I suppose, it's a classic example of that, but unlike other sequels, it's, been made at a quality that it nominated for an Academy Award. But yeah, obviously that was cashing in on the nostalgia that the original movie generated, I guess.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I would nominate Pablo Coffee as something that probably the last can should be buried like radioactive waste, I think.
I think it probably would still be the same format now if dug up.
I think so. Just as a final question, and a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what is it about Pablo Coffee that people just associate with not just only to be drunk at offices, but only to be drunk at offices where the bosses were cheapskates? Well, how did Pablo Coffee earn this reputation? Where did they go wrong, Melissa?
Well, I think it was not so much that they went wrong, it was before we actually knew what was right. I think it was actually just from an era where people hadn't travelled as widely and didn't understand what coffee actually tasted like.
I think you're right.
Maybe we just wised up eventually.
I think you're right. Yeah, everyone loved it until, they had their first cappuccino made by a proper barista, and then it was history. It was gone.
Exactly. But no one's got anywhere to keep their nails anymore, which is
No,
a problem.
no, you're right. Maybe there's a black market in, empty Pablo tins, I think. The only place they don't strike fear is in the home workshop, I think. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Hey, Melissa, fascinating to talk it over, but it sounds like Asahi with this and CUB are on a pathway to guaranteed success.
Absolutely. Let's watch this space.
Indeed. Hey, lovely to have a chat to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Melissa Morgan there. She's MBA Director and Associate Professor with the School of Business at Uni SQ.